The NFL Combine is here. Michigan has the most players who will be participating in the Combine since 2003. I don't know how to say my numbers. And you know what? I could break things down, and you all know kind of what I'm talking about because you've watched the games yourself. But we're going to bring in an outside voice. We're going to bring in PFF's Brad Spielberger to talk about what he sees from these Wolverines participating in the Combine on this episode of Locked On Wolverines.
You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Monday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. So we recorded this on Friday with the intent of it running on Saturday, but what I did not know when I promised a Saturday episode was that I did know we were doing this. I didn't know I wouldn't be able to post. We switched some behind the scenes stuff. So hence we are running it on Monday. So my apologies for that first and foremost. But without further ado, here's my conversation with Brad Spielberger. Over this side of me is Brad Spielberger from PFF. He is here to discuss some of Michigan's prospects that will be at the NFL Scouting Combine. I'm your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. Forgot to mention that part. Brad, thanks for joining. Super happy to have you, man.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you're going to be in Indianapolis to check out Michigan's record amount. I mean, that's not the sole reason you're there, but you'll be checking out Michigan's record amount of Combine invitees, 18 guys that are going to be there. Before we even get into the Combine, I don't mean to throw you a curveball, and it's probably not much of a curveball. I said this on Friday's episode. It's kind of odd because usually when a team wins a national championship, you get a lot of, okay, well, we're gonna see, half of those guys that are draft eligible go in the first round. When I look at Michigan and I look at all of these mock drafts that are coming out, most of them now do have JJ McCarthy in the first round. I've seen one, I think they had Roman Wilson in there, but otherwise we're not really seeing a lot of those guys go on the top end. Do you have any idea why that is? Because, it just seems like, well, they play as a team. Well, Georgia played as a team in 2021, and you still saw a lot of those guys go. But do you have any ideas as to why Michigan's not so popular at the top end of the draft?
It's interesting. Yeah, look, J.J. McCarthy will be a top 15 draft pick, so he's certainly going to be there. But if I had to guess, he's probably the only one. Like, maybe you get a Mozzie Smith type rise for Chris Jenkins, but I don't think we're going to get quite that. It's a fair question. I think this is a team that is in some ways built in an old school, not just college football mentality, but there aren't a lot of teams that are running a lot of gap scheme that have 330-pound guards. And 250-pound linebackers like a Junior Colson. Not those guys that are going in the first round all that often, but it's a throwback team in a lot of ways. And there are just a lot of teams at the NFL level now that are looking to be lighter, faster, and just kind of differently composed players. But it also, speaks to how this team was built as an actual team and to win games at the college level. Of course, they want to have NFL success and they have some freakish athletes, but it's also about building a, consistent winner, which they obviously did.
So that is kind of how I feel like there should be still some more guys, but I understand, there's a lot of athletes across the country. I think Michigan's going to show a lot of speed when it finally gets that opportunity this week. But you mentioned JJ McCarthy will be a top 15 pick. Obviously, he has surged up draft boards. People scoffed a lot when Jim Harbaugh said a couple weeks ago after he had joined the Chargers that JJ's, worthy of being the QB1. But at the same time, I'm still seeing mock drafts. Saw one that came out on Friday. No JJ in the first round. So let's get into him a little bit. What have you seen from him that makes you so confident? What are you expecting from him at the Combine, and kind of where do you expect at this point pre-Combine for him to go?
Yeah, well, I will say, like, sure, my opinion matters. I also just, read the tea leaves and or talk to people around the league and get a sense of where, guys are going to get drafted. So when I do a mock draft, which I'll do plenty before we get there, it's not my opinion. It's what I expect to happen. But anyway, obviously I've watched a lot of JJ tape. I'm a Bears fan, so, and I know he's from the Chicago area as well. So he was very much so on my radar as a potential quarterback addition before we knew they were going to be picking first overall, which I don't think he's going to be the first quarterback off the board. But I think he's potentially QB3, and no doubt about it will be QB4 at the worst. And like I said, top half of the NFL. So what I expect at the combine is people are going to see his athleticism, and he is a really, really good runner. He is, for his size as well, a smooth mover. I think he has a good quick reaction. So not just like a 40, but if he gets into the agility stuff a little bit, which matters with pocket manipulation and those things, I think he'll test well. Then he's going to throw. And I think obviously there's been so many comments of, he didn't throw the ball a ton. And there were a lot of games where he handed the ball off a million times and only had a couple, key moments of throwing the ball. The big thing for me, the one thing I will say, I like JJ, I think, more than maybe media consensus, so to speak. The one thing I do want to see more of that I hope we see in his throwing session is more touch throws. Like, we know he has a hose for an arm. He can make all the throws from a intermediate deep level. I think he's fairly accurate, outside the numbers in particular. He will throw over the middle of the field as well, but I think he trusts himself to be accurate. I did at times say a lot of fastballs here. Like, where is the kind of layered throws, touch throws, some of that? So if they put that into his plan for throwing, and if it looks good, I think that just further solidifies, at least in my eyes, but I'm sure the NFL would like to see that as well.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why we really didn't see a lot of JJ throwing the ball, obviously, compared to maybe a Jaden Daniels or a Drake May or a Caleb Williams, is because Michigan played complementary football, not just offense, defense, but also just offensively. You saw a lot of run game. I had kind of cautioned everybody that, like, listen, I know that a lot of people want to see Blake Corum go really, really high. But given that running backs tend to not be taken at a premium anymore, where do you see him kind of going, and what can he prove at the combine?
Yeah, he's a very interesting profile as well, because it kind of speaks to the larger Michigan point I just made. Like, I think he's a good gap scheme runner between the tackles, but he's a bit of a smaller guy. And then he's very, very efficient. You're going to get, you'll always get a couple yards, very few negative runs, because he will bounce off that first tackle and pick up, a little bit. And there were some great breakaway runs, but I don't think he has the top end speed that, the guys that do go a little bit earlier. Teams are saying this guy could break off a 60, 80-yard touchdown, and so we'll pay a little bit of a premium for a guy that can truly have these massive explosives that win football games. Those guys can go earlier than this guy's not going to have negative runs. He's not going to try to bounce everything outside and lose a yard here and there. He's always going to get 4 or 5 yards, but we'll see kind of less of that top end. So I think he's third, fourth round. I think it'll fall in that range. I do think he's a good player. I think we saw, as he got healthier over the course of the year from the offseason surgery, like, more explosiveness, more acceleration, more burst. Like, I think short area, he's great and quick and good laterally. I do wonder if the top end speed brings him down a little bit, but I guess testing, in Indy can always help with that.
Now, there's plenty of other guys I want to know your opinion of before the combine here, and I've got some other questions. We'll do some kind of more superlative type stuff here in just a moment. All right, we'll continue our conversation with Brad Spielberger here in just a moment, but before we do, get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel. That's America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. That's all you got to do is win one, and you got $150 extra to play with. It is so much fun. I took advantage of this some time ago, and I had a blast. Won a bunch of money, and then went to the casino and lost a bunch of money. That's how it goes. That's what you can do. If you're better at the casino games than me, a little more patient, then you can turn the money you win into more money. So bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, we are back, and we are discussing with Brad Spielberger from PFF about the Michigan guys at the NFL Combine. That is coming up in short order. So let us get into it a little bit more. So let's start with some superlatives before I get into some actual actual guys that we've already talked about. JJ McCarthy, we've talked about Blake Corum. There are a few others that I want to kind of get into, but before we do, when you look at when you look at all of these 18 guys, who is the one that you are the most excited to see this upcoming week?
Yeah, I think for me, it's probably got to be Chris Jenkins. It was the number one on the freaks list that Bruce Feldman puts out each year at The Athletic, which is an awesome resource. Yeah. And like, it's interesting. I thought you saw a lot of that. He's extremely strong. I know he set records at, Michigan for various weightlifting components. You saw it in on the field for the most part. He had a very fun matchup at times against Alabama with right tackle J.C. Latham, who is going to be a first round pick as well, who did get the better of him a couple times, which I thought was interesting. Kind of got inside of him, was able to displace him a little bit at the line, which rarely happened to Chris Jenkins. But I think if he tests really well, he's going to be one of those guys where it's just like, the size, speed, burst, strength combination is just too good to pass up. We know it's going to be good. I'm excited to see how freakish he really is in Indy.
Now, obviously, there's a ton of different guys that are going to be going. Some are under the radar. Some are a little bit less under the radar. If you had to pick one guy who people aren't maybe talking about that much outside of Chris Jenkins, JJ McCarthy, I mean, everyone's talking about JJ McCarthy. Who do you think that once the combine is over, given what you've seen on tape, who do you think everyone could be walking away from the combine and saying, wow, we did not really look at that guy as much as we should have, and gets kind of that John Ross from a couple years ago treatment where suddenly he's one of the guys that everyone's talking about?
So it definitely isn't John Ross. Comp isn't like jumping in the top 10, but a guy that I think people are too low on that I really like, and I'm excited to see how he tests, is A.J. Barner, the big tight end transfer, who I think, we'll see. Like on tape, I wouldn't say he looks like a great athlete, but I think he looks like a decent athlete for his size. A guy that can truly play inline and block, 6'6", 250 as we have him listed as. We'll obviously figure that out later on as well. But, good hands, good in open space, kind of rumbling over guys, or at times making a guy miss here and there. Like, I'm curious how he does with the agility stuff as well. We get the blocking sled, thing for tight ends we see. Is there burst and explosiveness there? Again, he's not going to go top 10, but like, I think he could go earlier than some people think, because it's not the greatest tight end class in the world. Beyond Brock Bowers, it's kind of a lot of question marks. And I thought he just looked good when I watched Michigan film. As an all-around good player.
All right, so we got those two superlatives down. I got one more for you. Obviously, I don't expect you to know. You don't cover Michigan directly, so I wouldn't expect you to know all 18 off the top of your head. But who do you feel has the most to prove, right? Because obviously, usually if you get a combine invite, you've got more than a good shot to get drafted, but it doesn't always happen that way. Out of you, and when you think just about who Michigan is sending off the top of your head, who do you feel has the most to prove?
That's a good question. Like, if you're thinking like guys that like maybe are fringe draft picked or not, like maybe a Josh Wallace at corner. We know about Mikey Sanders, still older player. He probably, unfortunately, might go a little bit later than people expect. As awesome as he is, as clutch as he is, he's a 24-year-old nickel-only corner, but a phenomenal and fun football player. But, I wonder there. Will Johnson was clearly the number one corner on this team, probably a guy that we're talking about next year as a first-round pick. But Josh Wallace had good tape as well. He's a little bit light, but he's 6 feet tall. Again, this is what we have listed. We always find these things out in Indy, but had a great grade for us, good in coverage. I think handled some of the bigger Ohio State receivers and just, Big Ten guys pretty well, and was physical when he needed to be. But I imagine a good combine would help him a bunch. So like you said, a million different names coming out of Michigan. A lot of them should get drafted. It may be probably more about like where does the guy actually go?
All right. Well, we are going to continue on. I'm going to ask you about one of those names you just mentioned and a couple others here on the other side. All right, we are back, and we have Brad Spielberger from PFF, and we are discussing Michigan players at the NFL Combine. That is coming up next week in Indianapolis. So we are getting a jump on it, continuing the Locked On Wolverines and PFF collaboration here. So excited to have Brad with us. So let's excuse me. Let's delve into a couple other guys here. You mentioned Mikey Sainristil, and it does seem kind of like an all over the board thing, right? Because some people look at him as a ladder guy, a day 3 guy, and then you got like Matt Miller from ESPN, who's like he's going to go higher than people think. You seem to be in the former camp. What does he need to do at the combine, and how can he maybe work his way up a little bit more?
Yeah, it's really it's tough. Like at a position that's been devalued in recent years, my focus is generally more like free agency, NFL side. It's been harder and harder for nickel corners. It's weird because we know they're valued more and more. They play more often. Teams are in nickel, in dime far more often. And yet it's just been tough for those guys to break through. There's still kind of the mentality of like, hey, just put your third corner, or an undersized guy in that spot and see if it works. But it doesn't always work. Sainristil, I think the big thing for him was like he threw his weight around. He was willing to get his nose dirty and make tackles on guys much bigger than him. Does not shy away from contact. And like I said, it seemed like clutch interceptions or pass breakups at all these key moments. I think just in a general sense, the long speed will be interesting. Can he handle vertical threats out of the slot, which we see more and more at the NFL level? So probably more like long speed with him. How does the 40 look? Does he maintain his speed for his size? I think we already know in a phone booth, he's a good athlete. He's agile, which obviously is a huge component of playing in the slot. Probably just long speed for him.
Now, I'd be remiss if we didn't discuss a little bit about the offensive line, because Michigan has essentially six starters from the offensive line, all going in the draft. Certainly Zach Zinter is the one that probably headlines that. I'm sure that he would be looked at more of a potential day 1 guy if it wasn't for his injury. But what do you think of him? And are there any other guys that you look at and say, all right, that guy, I can't wait to see what he does in this combine, because I feel like he's got an opportunity to really vault up the charts here?
Yeah, I'm with you on Zinter. I don't know about first round, but I think, pre-injury, he was clearly the best like gap scheme, physical, downhill run blocking guard in the class, or certainly one of them. There are some decent players there, but it's not a great class. And so that ties me into like Drake Nugent to me is interesting as a 3-year starter at a good program, running an offense that has some pro concepts. You're calling out protections, presumably a lot of the time with J.J. McCarthy, and it's not a great center class beyond some of the top guys. Like we've all heard about Jackson Powers Johnson, Zach Frazier at West Virginia, JPJ is an Oregon guy. The next crop of centers is interesting, and we've seen those guys go a little bit earlier off the board in recent years. I think teams are just prioritizing that spot a little bit more. So yeah, I think he's an interesting one that maybe for him, forget the testing, maybe like those meetings and getting on the whiteboard and stuff like that. It matters for everybody, but obviously, center, quarterback, stuff like that, it really matters.
And I do want to mention Trevor Keegan, because you being a Chicago guy, he's a Chicago guy. I said this on the an SB Nation podcast, breaking down all of Michigan's combine draft people, and he comes from the most Chicago family I've ever met. They're just the most straight up. Like I met up with the family before, excuse me, the Big Ten championship. And one of their family friends was with us, and the first thing he said is like, "Oh, you see the Hawks game last night?" I'm like, "Why would I? I'm from Michigan. Why would I have seen the Hawks game? That's the last thing I probably do." Nonetheless, what have you seen from him? Certainly, to me, he's a guy that isn't getting talked about enough, because he does seem to have kind of size. He's a road grader and everything. What are you hearing about him going into this combine?
Yeah, well, he just went up on my board a little bit with the Chicago, the Blackhawks poster right behind me. Yeah, so I love that. Yeah, you're like, I'm a Red Wings fan. I could not care less about what you're asking me. Yeah, so I think he's interesting, where I actually think he's a decent pass protector. I think compared to the Michigan standard of run blocking, there were times I think in space where he tripped over himself a little bit. Maybe could be cleaner, getting out, pulling, doing different things. I thought it was bad. Obviously, it's one of the best run blocking units in all of college football for the last several years. But I like his anchor and handling speed to power, some of those bigger interior pass rushers. I don't have a feel on where guys are going to go necessarily, but I hear you. Where no one's talking about him, and he was not a weak link by any means on this offensive line.
All right, well, that'll do it with Brad Spielberger. We'd love to have you back on following the combine to really get into what you did see rather than kind of what you're anticipating. But thanks for joining us. This was super awesome, and super excited to have you.
Of course, thanks for having me.
All right, that was Brad Spielberger from PFF. We thank him greatly for joining. And we'll have him back on afterwards because I think that Michigan players are going to surprise greatly. And I think it will change the calculus of what a lot of people think the NFL draft in 2024 is going to be. But we will continue on at another time. So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We will talk again soon. Peace.